Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. It's Nature Folklore Sessions. Today is 9th of October, 2022. That was a great start, wasn't it? I got kicked. I got bumped off. The whole computer jumped off me. Anyway, here we are. And as I say, sessions 9th of October 2022. Thank you for joining me on this weekly time of exploring nature-centered folklore, connecting this to your favorite sanctuary space and expressing your inspired visions from your sanctuary through your poetry, writing, crafts, art, performance, and even problem solving. This is the third of what will now be 7 nature folklore editions that's leading up to Sawan or Savan, whatever way you pronounce it. And this is the third, if I can get up my photographs, because they got booted off as well. So I'll find my photographs again. And it's, I say, there we go. It's the third part of Witches, Cauldrons Ale series. And this is pretty exciting stuff. No guest today. I'm doing this solo, but there are several guests that are already booked for upcoming weeks to look forward to. And so, as I usually say, these nature folklore sessions, the videos in tree and water sanctuary support, they're brought to you with the kind support of our lovely subscribers. Without them, I couldn't fund putting on this show to share with you. So thank you for all your help with that. To subscribe to Nature Folklore, that's the main link, the Patreon one there. And if you Patreon go through PayPal, some people are uncomfortable about that platform. So if you're one of those and prefer to just use a card on Buy Me a Coffee, and there's the banner going rolling away there to how you get onto that one. There we go. Helping either way, helping out with $1, pound, or euro a month, because several people do this. It all helps and goes a long way towards keeping the show afloat. So many thanks for your help. Whatever you can do with that, it's highly appreciated. Now I've got an announcement to make. The announcement is after Sunday, the 6th of November. That is just before the true point, the sidereal point of Sawan. After that edition of Nature Folklore, I'm going to change direction because I want to write support books to this series, the actual series of Nature Folklore books. And I'm also doing the broadcasting of Holy Welsh Revival on Wednesdays. That's not going to change. But I don't have any time, I'm finding, in the week for any writing. I'm putting on one show, then ready to put on the next show. So what my intentions and goals are is, as I say, 6th of November, Nature Folklore broadcast. That edition is going to be one I haven't done before, but it's a lovely one to end this sort of age of Nature Folklore, is What is the Veil? And that'll be the last live broadcast of Nature Folklore for a while. I hope to come back with it, but I want to get these books. So instead of using time to prepare for these Sunday broadcasts with writing chapters, I'm going to write chapters for upcoming Nature Folklore books. That's what I'm going to do. And really, I have far too much nature folklore content to just bring one book out. That was the original intention, of course. So my goal is 4 books that are going to be released through 2023. A lot of it's all written up already, so this is going to be quite convenient for me as well. So the first one will be Nature Folklore Imbolc and Spring Flowing. That'll come out intentionally Monday 30th of January 2023. Then following that will be the Nature Folklore Bednar and Summer Sowing. That'll come out on Monday 24th of April in 2023. And Nature Folklore Lunacy and Autumn Harvest coming out Monday 31st of July 2023. And then the 4th one in the series, Nature Folklore Sawan and Winter Dreaming, to come out Monday, the 30th of October, 2023. So this will be the book of the Sunday broadcast. And then hopefully in 2022, we'll be back doing this again. Anyway, I'm going to start the pre-order offers from mid-November. And I'll also put in a Patreon level as an alternative, so that qualifies for you to get your own copy. I'll just send it to you because of you being a generous supporter anyway. And I'll also try to release short videos during the writing to introduce you to how I'm getting on with the project. Meanwhile, the Holy Well Revival live broadcasts, they'll keep happening every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Irish time, shorter, trying to get them down to 30 minutes. Anyway, after I've introduced all that, let's see what lovely early birds we have already here for the show. And we got Kate Cow Sparks here. Excited you'll have books. I'll want to get the set for sure. And there's Penny. Thank you, Kate. And Penny, hello from North Lincolnshire, close to the Lincolnshire Wolds. You're back home, are you, Penny? Fantastic. I hope so. And as I say, there's Kate, rural Iowa. That's around. So thank you for those that are on. Yeah, there's quite a few of you are on quite early today. So thank you very much. Absolutely wonderful that you're here. So on with the show here. Now to recap, as I say, this is part 3. And I'm going to recap on part 1 where I introduced how I better get to some pictures. It'd be nice, wouldn't it? Let's get geared up. I think there's 1 or 2 other people have come before I sort of race away. Yes, Penny's back home in Lincolnshire for a bit, which is fabulous. Well done. That should be very pleasant. Anyway, getting on to a picture that hasn't come up. Beer and ale has been an essential part of the human diet for at least 7,000 years, possibly up to 10,000 years. And how the entire history of brewing from the deep ancient times, maybe from 10,000 BC, and we're talking about bread as well, so anything to do with yeast, it's always really brought in very much about the history of women. So early archaeological studies of women and brewing. Sorry, I'm bringing the photo, messing with photos. And there's archaeological evidence of brewing from 2000 BC in Iran. And with there's ancient scripts they've got on stone. And within these ancient scripts, it was discovered a description of the role of a woman being called an alehouse wife when it was translated out. So that really got my fascination going. And I've been trying to put together fragment pieces to discover what an alehouse wife is, as variations of the tradition has definitely spread west through all kinds of clans, tribes, and nations for thousands of years now. Including skirting around the patriarchal culture of the Roman Empire and right on to being revered by the northern tribes of Saxons, Angles, Jutes, Danes, Vikings, and other Norse people, especially the men, of course. The men, I spoke of how the alehouse women of Norse people, they seem to regard these women as goddesses. There's some Norse goddesses there. I think I've got 2 pictures. Let's see what I got. No, only the one came up. Anyway, during part 2, I became more local with the alehouse wives traditions. It was the medieval momentum edition. And I covered how the alewives tradition seemed to have arrived in what is now the UK through the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jute traditions, and also included how in Ireland brewing is part of the legends of the mythology of St. Bridget of Kildare. Definitely part of a healing part as well. Let's get rid of that banner for you so you can get the whole pictures now. Be quite handy. And now I have, computers are deciding to switch on and off at a rapid rate here. So I'm trying, I don't know what's happening. It's all, got 3 of them going and they're all clicking on and off. But I hope we're not getting some kind of power cut anyway, because it's a very wet, nice, beyond soft wet day, but it's supposed to clear up here and we're supposed to get the hunter's moon, the tree seed dropping moon, the frost moon, because we've got frost forecast coming up. It's supposed to be a beautiful, clear night tonight. Anyway, we'll hope so. Anyway, back to the story here. As I say, in Ireland, the brewing became part of some Bridget, even during Saxon times and medieval times. For many women, the creation and distribution of alcoholic beverages, it was really their sound alternative to slavery. And again, the picture's missing. But anyway, this was from early medieval times, around 5th century, when this seemed to really start up the alehouse. Sorry about that. I'm tech issues are bumping me off at a higher rate, and I just don't know why this is. So apologies, and I'll catch up each moment. I hope this stops. It's irritating, of course. Sorry. Anyway, the alehouse wives, they set themselves up in these wicker dome kind of huts, covered maybe with hides. That's thin sheets of wood, I think, but it could be hides, thatch, that type of shape. And these brewing huts would have been positioned beside sacred spring wells that we know as holy wells today, because without the water, there was no brewing. So that's anyway. The women of this time, they were already making dough, baking bread, planting and growing herbs, and they farmed grains, they ground up the grains, made the flour, and also boiled some of the grain ingredients in their large black cauldrons. Like that. That's the image that was being used, as I say, in the recap here. Now, the choice then may have been to actually do all of this in slavery, or recognize that their cauldrons were their magic spell makers, and with the potential for getting into brewing enterprises and breaking away from any kind of enslavement. And obviously, if that picture's anything to go by, there's some pretty good hairdressers in the early medieval times, not bad with the makeup materials either. And ancient women, they discovered that through their cauldrons, they could do much to satisfy and the seemingly unlimited demand for alcoholic beverages for the men. But during those early days, those early medieval days, ale was probably more conceived as a potential health tonic drink rather than something to get merry and have fun with. And ale was perhaps the first basics of ancient herbal medicine, regarded as being safer and obviously more helpful than water, and quite an advance on tea as well, because of the fermentation involved. But during part 2, I also talked about the importance of the alehouse women's brooms. There you go. There's some broom pictures there, and so and how they use those brooms to lure their customers, their clients, to the alehouse. There you go, the broom over the house. And that's a symbol that the brew was ready. That's a lovely medieval description there. Also, they wore the pointed hats. I explained about that. Where they're in the market, they're gathering the clients when they see a woman like that with a pointed hat. It shows that her brew is ready because she's there amongst the men traders, etc. And then it's like the Pied Piper. She would covertly lead the customers to a place of brewing and do her trade. And I also talked about the children that they bore and how they integrated into their mother's brewing business rather than go to school, because that was their apprenticeship. And I covered how the family involved in the brewing business, extra hands make more work, more customers, more clients. So the business is expanded way beyond that hut that I showed you. So the premises eventually included something like a barn-style outhouse that was converted for spaces for people to sleep. Because as we went on through medieval times, I think these brewers started to understand how to make these brews a bit stronger, and how their clients could get a bit more legless and couldn't get home, so they wanted a bed to sleep. And there was also probably extra extra space, but it definitely was by late medieval times for bathing. And a chance of getting hot water. And of course, that's an extra fee, extra earnings. So what I really did on part 2 was introduce 1,000 years of medieval years and the legacy of the alehouse wives' descendants, advancing from those humble wickedom shelters into much more secure established bars and taverns. They really evolved into taverns as extraordinary as this, but then that's 1,000 years. And I went on to show some examples of pubs and taverns that are still existing in the UK and Ireland, that still operate today, but they are operating from the legacy of those medieval ale houses, medieval alehouse wives on the same sites. Parts of old buildings might be there, but generally replaced. But perhaps the most important of all, and this is really what's going to lead into today, is the Cauldrons Inn in Kilkenny, which was established in a wrong picture. No, yeah, it is. There it is. Cauldrons Inn in Cauldrons in Kilkenny. That was established in late medieval times by an alehouse woman, Alice, and that's the figure of Alice there that came up first. And the thing with Alice, she was actually accused of witchcraft and was burnt. And this is a pictation of her trial. Very strong case she's giving there. And Alice was the first woman to be burned at the stake as a witch in Ireland on the 3rd of November, 1324. Now, before any women had been burned, Alice was burned before any women had been burned at the stake in Britain. And of course, it got more lethal in Germany, which was really where the burning went on. But the charges against Alice, I gave you a list of them last week, but one of them included making love potions to corrupt the purity of Christians. And because by Alice's time, the ales, as I was saying, were getting stronger, increasing in alcohol content. Rather than being love potions, their ale probably caused brewers' droop, but not until after the clients had spent their money. That was how the business had changed, I suppose. Get the money first. Anyway, these clients, even when that happened, they would still return the next evening, probably to try again. So, by the 9th century, this was about halfway through the medieval age, and the changes in the culture were really coming about at speed. They'd been through quite a whole century, really, 6 and coming into the early 7th, where plagues came in, what we would call epidemics now, that had really thrown everything aside. But everything was getting really organized, getting very advanced. There was quite a few control systems in the culture coming in. And at this time, the patriarchal boys' clubs, their guilds, they were kind of really getting together and they were linked up with the churches. They would be getting together. Some lads taking a break there with a church person, I suppose. And these guilds, the church guilds, these boys' clubs, they were coming very well established, larger, and much more influential upon the local culture. And this included developing their doctrines, sort of fine-lining their doctrines, which they would express as being improving standards of morality. But of course, it was their own interpretations of standards of morality that was probably convenient to themselves. And the other thing was they would teach that these standards of morality that they were putting in, enforcing, were taught to them by the scriptures, word of God. And they could do that because most people still couldn't read by the 7th, 9th century, and they certainly couldn't read the translated scriptures that the scribes were making at the time. So these gilded men could not be argued with when they verbally said they were quoting from them. So these men, these guild men, these patriarchal boys' clubs, they were the scholared gatekeepers of the scripts because they could read them and they could even write them. So it looks like the patriarchal church guild and the church linked all the secret societies, the men in those, they started to become impatient with the successful alehouse women from the 9th century onwards, because they were starting, being of the church guilds, they regarded themselves as the men of commerce and as if they had the exclusive right of local commerce. Now, it seems fear increased amongst the men regarding these women that were being very successful, that started off as the sort of alehouse women in a kind of poverty, had expanded into this sort of wealth. Obviously, it wasn't money in the bank, but it was wealth by the ability to build and expand and to serve. So this was, these men were trying to have the exclusive right, all the turfs to the wealth of a community, but these women were still in the way. So it seems these wealthier alehouse women did attempt, they realized that there was fear amongst the men, and the women wanted, they didn't want the friction. So it seems they attempted to form business alliances with these men, because they recognized that the alliances with their industry and what the men were doing, if you could join up the alliances, then that increases the wealth for everyone. But within these church gilded boys' clubs with the veneers of Christian morality, purity, the tension actually between those lads and these women actually increased. And regarding any thought of female alliances was just not on. So this is what seemed to finally break out into the cultures, into the life of Ireland, and what happened to Alice Keitela, who became a wealthy alehouse wife. She tried to form alliances, and she was successful forming some alliances with men, but these men ended up turning on her due to the populist propaganda that was pushed out by these guilds, by these boys' club, and the propaganda, obviously, and this is really what the main subject is, it was claiming that the brewing women, what they were really doing wasn't a health safe tonic. They were conducting devil alliance witchcraft. They had alliances with the devil, not with them. And the plight of Alice Keitela was a well-recorded example where the charge of witchcraft was really a charge of a woman becoming independently wealthy from serving men ale and even serving them women for company and for lust. Now, I wonder if at the front of these church-based guilds were the first strategic men alliances, including intent to overcome and overthrow the spread of women brewing alehouse culture. Was this what they were intended? Anyway, unless the men could actually own and control the breweries themselves, and this is sort of how lovely artist's impression of how the communities probably would have been around about that time, aside from brewing and tavern management by these alehouse wives, the alehouse wives' sons also shared the brewing with their mothers and developed equal brewing skills. So how did their sons establish themselves as male brewers? How much were their sons lured into these church-linked male guilds, the boys' clubs? Did they feel isolated as men by not being part of these clubs? alehouse wives' sons, they must have had a huge burden upon them, deciding between the loyalties to their mothers or being bonded to these leagues of other men. Anyway, I'm going to check your comments for a moment before I move on and hold you with that thought. And Cliff Carr's with us. Looking forward to the show, John. Have to watch it later. Work beckons. And then we have Sheila and a gig bite from the YouTube. Always lovely to get some YouTube commenting and greetings from Belfast. Or there it's spelled as it's pronounced, Belfast. There you go. Very good. Wonderful. Lovely to have you on board via the YouTube. Fantastic there. Right. Where am I up to? Let's line up some more photos for you. Now, there's no doubt that brewing has it defined the human power, right? It has done right through 9,000 years of human history now. And throughout the world, ale brewing has often defined a tribe, often and later on defined nations. But is nationalism, is it fiction? I often think about that one. And the people who hand out the people's ale and mugs, they're responsible for creating the brewing enterprises. And they're also the same people who operate the levels of power over people. Always have been. And my father, I've said this on Nature Folklore a few times, but my father often reminded me quite frequently that nobody can get anything done or get any cooperation until you buy the other person a drink. Now, through my, though my father set up a network of healing circles, my father also had another life as a fixer who arranged to get things done through that buy the other person a drink philosophy, because that's what he meant, to sort of, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine kind of arrangement. And today, of course, we call that pushing the envelope, don't we? So that gives a bit of imagery of that. That's an example of buy the other person a drink. That's a very expensive drink when it's done like that now. Anyway, within the alehouse wives, when men paid for ale for themselves and for their friends, doors of lusty pleasure opened up for these men. And I seem to have, it's funny, the pictures, I did have I had a quite nice picture for that, and it hasn't come up. Let's see if I can, give me a moment to try and get that one. A lot of pictures have gone astray again. So I'm going to, shame to miss out on them. So I'm going to try and call them back up again. Yeah, this is it. Yeah, I don't know why it didn't come up. Anyway, this will do it. Right. I'll start that again. There we go. As I say, I thought that was a lovely description of men paying for the ale, their selves and friends, and it opens up the door of lusty pleasure. There we go. Just a cheeky picture I wanted to put in for that one. There was about 1,000 years of establishing medieval ways, as I say, from about the 4th, 5th century, right through to the 14th, 15th century. And the alehouse women slowly earned revered status positions. But as I was saying, from the sort of 9th century time, it started to move into decline during the so-called Christian conversion into later medieval centuries. Now, this included the establishment of human order through the whole restructuring of culture into more manageable, sort of templated societies of human order. Feudalism is what they listed, the historians listed as. Hopefully I've got something up for you. Yeah, here we go. And this compares medieval feudalism of 12th to 14th century with just what really exists today. There you go. And there we are, right at the bottom. And so you've got all those other characters in the feudal system. And there was another picture. Oh, damn. I don't know. This is a shame. I had another one. I'm going to get another one up for you as well. I wonder why there were so few pictures on my... I brought them up onto the computer, but a lot of them didn't quite make it. So I'll get the other one up. I think this is another lovely diagram as well that kind of shows that. There we go. There's another one. This is a reason why you'll never get me visiting the pyramids in Egypt, because this is how I think that, they were built to put a king on the top of reverence, and all the people on the bottom was what built the thing. Anyway, I'll leave that one alone, and I just hope I don't have any other missing pictures. Anyway, this was during the last 200 years of the medieval age. And again, more pictures have disappeared. Excuse me while I try and catch up on this one. This is really sad that this has happened like this. I'll try and keep an eye on that. No, they've disappeared off of my computer as well. So I'll just keep on going. The scribing industry then too, and the human lifestyle of values was changing rapidly as well at this time. And it seems that the men eventually wanted to take over the breweries from the women by force. Now, during the 12th to 14th century feudalism, men patriarchally, through their guilds and secret societies, did take over much of the business of brewing. And I think I got a bit of a picture on that one. That's the wrong one. I'm sorry that I'm getting my pictures all muddly up. Let's see. I've kind of... No, I really... Sorry. This is embarrassment. Anyway, I'll say that again. You know, the feudalism age, the men had these secret societies, their guilds, and they did take over much of the business of brewing. Now, these patriarchal churchmen, the way they did their takeover, and I hinted on this a bit earlier, was they conjured up the imagery of a witch being a woman who's in partnership with the devil, something like this. And this was done to enchant. They would claim that the witches were they had a liaison with the devil to enchant people, that they were using their brewing not to provide health for the people, but to enchant them into devil worship. This is because they were church people, of course. And the women they branded upon this seemed to be the most successful. The alehouse women, the most successful of them was the ones that were enchanted as saying, well, they're only successful because they've been in league with the devil. And then really it's because they'd achieved leading positions in the communities, in the villages, in the small towns. They were kind of leading lights, and people almost felt dependent on them. The alehouse woman was not just the person who served ale, was the person to consult, was the psychologist, the consultant, was the counselor, was the herbalist, was the healer, was the doctor. So many roles. It was someone, that person, the priest even. They were kind of more important than the priest to a lot of people. Rather than just have orderly confessions, just go along to the alehouse wife who's got a listening ear. Anyway, this propaganda campaign by the men eventually, unfortunately, seemed to turn local people against the alehouse women. And it didn't, but it still didn't stop the women and their brewing, because some of these women, they actually, with all this aggression and being pushed around, what they did was actually take some of their brewing, they took their brewing tradition out from the villages they were in, and they went into the retreat and carried on doing what they were doing in the nunneries. And this was one way of not being victims of the mass popularist witch hunt that developed into this cruel burning at the stake exhibitions that went on. They escaped, so they could do it by escaping to the nunneries. And the incredibly wise and intelligent German nun, St. Hildegard of Bingen, was very open, because, as I say, Germany, it was a lot worse than anywhere else. And she was opening in recommending the use of brewing with an emphasis on healing, bittering, and preserving. She was a nun. She was connected with the church. So she could say these things, and there's nothing that any of these patriarchal church guild people could do about it, because part of the church. So, that was the way these brewers could get these women brewers could just carry on what they were doing, just like that. So, but this was kind of accepted, because with what St. Hildegard was showing, was she was going back to the emphasis on the healing and also the fermenting and the preserving. And that was really taking away promoting the ale and the alehouse as being a lusty indulgence for just merriment and mischief. So, being of tight order, the church and Rome, these nuns lived and conducted their enterprises under the very protective sanctuary that was well away. The witch hunters couldn't touch them. So the 12th century onwards was probably the start of as I say, that the 12th century was when this propaganda really started spreading around, where alehouse wives were branded as witches. But the word witch, where does that come from? Where do these lads get that from? I think it was a mixed up Saxon words they were familiar with, because there's a Saxon word pica, Picca, and that is a general word that describes the creation and enchantment of magic. And then there's another word, week, which is Weik. And that describes, I don't know what this is supposed to mean. This is a word that actually describes making movement while you're bending over. So, the idea of the witch bending over, creating enchantments. And but at the same time, I suppose there was a little bit of association with the lusty side of things. Anyway, there you go. That's where the witch came from. The weak bending over, and the pica, whilst bending over, doing the stir and creating enchanted magic. So that's where it's come from. So after the 12th century, it slowly became worse and difficult, even, of course, life-threatening for many women in brewing. And that lasted for about 14 years into the 16th century. And the persecution, as we well know, against the women suspected as witches, it really spread through Europe and seemed to be worse than anywhere in Germany. Now, some of this persecution was also upon the sons of these alehouse women, who'd also become brewers. And they were branded as witches as well. In fact, the first witch that was burned at the stake in Germany was a man that was a brewer. But unfortunately, I've lost any more reference to him. It was fascinating to read where I did find the reference. But anyway, I did find the thing that, the other thing I think, these men, they were stake burning all these women and so forth. There's an illustration there. I think by losing these women, by burning them at the stake, or by them escaping them and retreating into the nunneries, it must have been a huge loss for these patriarchal church guild men. How did they live on without having the abundance of alewives like they once had? Where would they buy their ale? Or even their lusty sex? Where would that come from? Now, I find it ironic that the men who burned the women at the stake were perhaps their best customers for the ale and the loose lust. So it seems that some things in some countries have not changed much, have they? I think we've got a bit of that going on in some places now. But sadly, these men did work as an alternative way of massing a pool of women into slavery as a replacement for their alewives. They went into buying women because they could get women with a single payment to possess the women back into the sort of old form of slavery again. Now, that payment, I believe, it does seem going back, is actually the foundation of the dowry traditions that are around the world. So, in that late medieval and ongoing Puritan branding of witches, it may be very different. Well, it is very different to the Celtic romantic image that we may have of witches today. Now, these days, perhaps from memories of childhood fairy tale books, we may imagine witches as very wise mother hags. Let's see what we got here. Stirring at a hot black cauldron of their secret recipes. Here's some hags here. That's the sort of thing we perhaps imagine. And also, any images of their children would be of their children helping these cauldron witches in black and helping them out by going out and about foraging and harvesting the ingredients for their special spells and then preparing them from the pot. And it's more likely we may vision a witch, not with children, but with little helping elves and gnomes, a bit like these characters here. Anyway, magic potions, is that what they were doing indeed? After all that I've said? Anyway, there's a couple more comments here. And Claire's joined with us now. How lovely. and saying I love such reverence for women and nature. Thank you very much. I hope there's been some of that. It's been a bit of a cruel episode, but there we go. So we got the cauldron fermentations of these alehouse wives. We imagine them overflowing and calling, but going through the history I've showed, it's really to make drinks that seem to be safer than water. And as I've pointed out, if you find a herbalist who isn't fermenting, isn't brewing, isn't distilling, isn't making mash, then to me, that's not really a herbalist. And it's amazing how the work of a brewer and the work of a herbalist who has all those skills is absolutely identical, because those early alehouse women, they weren't just brewing from hops. They were brewing from all kinds of different plant combinations and seaweed combinations, that type of thing. So drinks, the alcoholic drinks we're familiar with loosens up any men, maybe to lose control. Yeah, and the one thing, if there are a few drinks, they could lose control and be at the service and even at mercy of these alehouse women. And by being out of control, and I think was the motivation for these women to make the alcoholic brews rather than the health drinks, to actually have a bit more alcohol in them, because their clients would then part with their contents in their purses much quicker. And the men were being spellbound to overcome their control by patriarchy, as indeed it was. Now, this is not a suggestion that feminism could win recovery of its gender by getting every man drunk, though enchanting him into believing that he's a stallion rather than a limp pony could induce some enchantment, I suppose. But emptying their purses to build the blocks of their wealth may have actually been the business process that actually caused the greater irritation of these patriarchal church guild men, the embarrassment of it. So that probably was contributed to the anger of that. Anyways, so from about the 12th century, men seemed to self-declare themselves as being the rightful wealth makers. And let's get another picture of these wealth makers. There we go. There's some men wealth makers there. In fact, there's some tailors there. They really sort of went off with. That was one of the first industries they seemed to take off from. So for centuries before that, the growing success of alehouse wives must have been really a growing irritation for them. So from the 12th century, patriarchal men's culture became more and more ordered, as I say, through the boys' clubs, the guilds, all connected to the church. And through these guilds, they seemed to believe that decisions were always ensured. They reckoned all their commercing was connected to the doctrine and morality of the church. They feel it was all collected. And what all it was to whitewash the male-run guilds that were really a kind of a gang, I think, attempting to stop women. And the gang just took over. And so their choice of burning the women with fire, they explained it away as being God-commanded cleansing, because they felt that was the morality that they were following, in the word name of God. Anyway, our US viewers think of these alewives as being like the victims of the Salem witch trials. And that's a sort of a deja vu of the European witch trials between 1400 and as late as 1800. Now, looking at the women of Salem who were accused of magic, devil dancing, devil mating, were they actually alewives as well, secretly serving the lust of the purist churchmen in North America that were about to burn them? Now, these days, the idea of ale brewing was the domain of and craft of wise women that turned around their enslavement from servitude. It was regarded perhaps that their wealth was a sort of a self-controlled, prostituted wealth. I think that's absolute nonsense, really. It wasn't prostituted wealth when you really go into it. today we see brewers and breweries. It's very much a man's world. And the Wild West saloons of the USA were largely a man's world too. But women were employed by the men there too. And that's like, there's a saloon, nothing to do with women. I just thought it was a funny joke for musicians anyway. And often these women, they were able to group together within these male-run saloons in the old USA to enforce their own terms within these establishments. I don't know why that picture came up, but no, that's something that got messed up. So I'll take that out. All right, I suppose he was in charge of a saloon. Anyway, the transformation of the brewing realm of women into yet another boys' club industry happened after the witch burnings and similar. So the growing church organizations and their guilds, they just grew in numbers. In Europe, in the USA, these guilds, they just got bigger and bigger. And the power just made impossible for these alehouse wives to operate within the communities like they used to. So from the 16th century, that's why the women's tradition remained, the brewing tradition remained within the nunneries. And I got a few pictures. There's a brewing nun there. These are modern pictures because, of course, there wasn't photography back then. But it's just to give you a bit of an insight at how the brewing went into the nunneries and even brews like that. So any questions on that or any comments or any points of view, absolutely highly welcome. So put them in now if you can. And now, during the 16th century, the Christian Puritan men, through their guilds, they were very active government lobbyists at the time, as you could well see. This is what this was really. I think that was government lobbying somewhere in that picture. So they were really involved with the government. No wonder the USA separate church from state. I tried to. But in what is now Ireland, UK, and Europe, these churchy people, they lobbied for legislation that would put into law crippling bureaucratic standards of brewing conditions for the quality of beers and ales. There were strict new laws for both food production and the brewing of ales. These were sort of the first of the purity laws. And in order to meet these purity laws, to be able to do it, as I say, what was happening in the past is real deja vu of what's happening now. So in order to be legal now with the brewing and the food making, it required huge financial investment to under these laws and to be able to operate legally. So many of the brewing women were forced out of the market just because of these new laws, or just forced into the nunneries. They just couldn't afford the cost of becoming legal. They couldn't afford the cost of upgrading into these new production requirements that were brought in during the 16th century. So in those days, it was probably also said, oh, we're doing this to improve health and safety, not for getting women out of business. That was their excuse. Anyway, so the women who didn't and couldn't afford to invest in these new standards, they still operated covertly as brewers and alehouse women, like they started off in early medieval, near the villages, near the small towns, not by the big cities, but they were caught and they were severely prosecuted. By now, they weren't burning women at the stake, thank goodness, but they were fining them, seized all the property, all their wealth, and if, of course, they couldn't pay the fines, these fines would be huge. They were eventually put into jail for not being able to pay their fines. And within about 100 years of the strict Puritan laws on brewing, the brewery industry really became totally monopolized by the men, because there was hardly any women involved in it anymore to serve that. Now, these stricter Puritan laws on brewing, basically the framework was, they expanded it. It wasn't only standards of brewing, but they brought in extra addendums that banned women between the ages of 14 to 40 from becoming alewives. And they were saying that that law was enforced to ensure that it was women outside of childbearing age that became alewives and brewers. so there wouldn't be any illegitimate children from those who went for their services, or they wouldn't breed sons. This was the whole point of it. So the excuse for making these laws and accusations that alehouse women, they said that alehouse women between that age, they also cheated their customers out of their money, as well as practicing what they called unacceptable sinful traits. So they felt that the women outside of the ages of 14 to 40 didn't do that. They were clean living women. So were the men who took over the brewing more honest and trustworthy than that? Were they not cheating customers and performing unacceptable sinful traits as well? Anyway, these church guilds of Puritan men, they grew mainly within the urban areas very quickly. However, it doesn't seem that many of these purist men took retreats into the rural areas. There's some of these men, they sneaking out. They knew these alehouse women were out there, so they sneaked out to get back into the old ways themselves. And so they would head off into these rural situations, knowing these covert alehouse women were still there, engaging in their lust. And they would still be sneaking out there, doing the same old thing of donating part of their wealth into the purses of these illegal alehouse wives. But sadly, what happened was they turned their Christian guilt of this into the destruction of the remaining rural alehouse wives, and again doing it in the name of God. So similar scenes seem to be happening today with retreats. There are retreats in the Caribbean right now disguised as business conferences, where corporate men, they go to them, tell their wives they're going to a business conference, which is deciding the future of the businesses and improvement in marketing and learning new skills, when in fact it was just a front for engaging in organized corporate lust. That's still going on. So any more questions from you there? I think understanding some of the history stories of the alehouse wives and how they became branded as witches may help to understand women's positions in how their culture and how this has changed. When we hear things like the news of the Taliban takeover, the Texas law changes, the revived extreme Republican ideals, and the antics and deeds of weird people like Brazil's Bolsonaro and Belarus's Lukashenko, and of course Russia's Putin, women must seriously question, where's this going for us? Now, I'll repeat again, if I can get this. Brewing still seems to define a culture and nation. For example, can you now imagine Ireland without Guinness? And the brewing industry seems to have long been taken over by men, but it's not quite worldwide. Men haven't taken it over at all. I example Bolsonaro in Brazil, but the brewing industry managed by women in South America is really expanded. The brewing is very much in the domain of women there. And similar is happening through African countries as well. There's a rural tradition one here, and here's a woman working in an urban brewery, a modern urban brewery. And with more women entering the brewing industry around the world, there's no fear of being burned as witches. There's another example, a brewer in Nepal there. Anyway, I believe it would be worthy of ale and beer lovers to raise glasses and celebrate this, or celebrate a return to how originally the alehouse wives were there, caring in balance with the drinking men patrons. One really depended and consoled in the other. Now, to celebrate the new season of the witch that we interpret and how we look into now, it does seem that many women are eager to be identified as witches. It could be identifying themselves as the ultra spiritual white witch, maybe something like this, or even the black witch. The difference confuses me a bit, because for many women, Witches are their heroes and their role models, but not as alehouse wives, but relating more to the independent rebel and rural herbalist image. Or this, a lot of women would like to be able to charge around on a broom, I'm sure. A lot of men would too. Now, some women seem to replace the witch word with something more grand and more authoritative these days, such as warrior goddess is one of them, or even warrior goddess such as the Morrigan. Now, some of the so-called witchery seems to have become very theatrical these days, and I must admit I do like the theatrical myself. And I would love your comments on that as well. But it does seem that women are invoking the witch and warrior goddess image to discover and honor their position in areas where the patriarchal culture seems to be dominant. Here's another sort of warrior witch photo. That's a pretty good one. And today, some billionaire men, while they're building their penis-shaped spaceships like this, women still hold the magical mystery of their broomsticks and their cauldrons. If I can get a cauldron picture up. So there we have it with that. So I think that's about as much as I can relate to part 3, going through what was a difficult phase there into the magic that kind of exists. So ask any questions that you have. As I mentioned earlier, I'm keeping this Nature Folklore show financially afloat, and thanks to our subscribers, you can donate through the Patreon. And if you just want to whip out a card, I'll throw the banner there again. Buy me a coffee, Nature Folklore there. Any dollar, euro, or pound or more helps a month, goes a long way to keeping this show afloat. So thanks very much. Now, coming up on the Nature Folklore sessions, I haven't got any pictures on this coming up. I'll tell you what's coming up. It's the rest of the Sawan series. Next week, 16th of October, I've got the Serpent Folklore for Sawan. 23rd of October, we've got special guest Mancor Magan. He's going to be our guest, and he's going to be talking about his Listen to the Land speak. Well, if you've been to my Facebook profile, you'll see me presenting parts and examples of that. So it's an absolute delight for Nature Folklore. One to not miss is Mancor Magan as a guest, talking about his book and a few other things that we cover on Nature Folklore. So that'd be fantastic. 30th of October is What is Sacred Fire? It's a new subject, but going into the fire traditions, especially for Sawan. And then the final broadcast for a while is the 6th of November, which is What is the Veil? A very appropriate thing for the switchover of what are you doing. As I mentioned at the start of the show, I'm retiring the Nature Folklore broadcast for a year while I compile, write, and publish a series of 4 Nature Folklore books through 2023, really duplicating what I've been covering over the last 3 years on these broadcasts. So if you missed the start of this broadcast when I explained this, it's worth going back to the replay, the archive, to find out what's going to be happening, what's coming forward, what's going to be released and when. Meanwhile, don't forget 7 p.m. Wednesday Irish time. I'm still continuing Holy Welsh Revival editions every Wednesday that I'm trying to keep shorter to 30 minutes max if I can. And next Wednesday, we're covering, it's the 12th of October Wednesday. It's going to be again, it's still on the subject. It's going to be witches and wells. And I'll also cover 1 or 2 Galway wells as well. Any more questions before I go? So thank you for watching Witches, Cauldrons Ale, and maybe the whole 3-part series. It's a subject fascinating. It's a complex one. And I hope it gives you some background to that interesting life that became the witches. A lot of people, they'll say, oh no, they want to hold on to what they have as the image of witchery today, which has probably been passed down from the Celtic romance of the late 19th century, especially early 20th century, and certainly perhaps through the Wicca years. But I thought it's very interesting putting together components of the alehouse women, especially in relation to how it seems to be in kind of right-wing-ish lives today. So if you're watching this after this broadcast as an archive, please keep your comments and opinions going. I will return from time to time to answer comments and questions. Also, click subscribe below if you're watching the YouTube, and I'll remind you of details of each next session. So enjoy a safe week, all full of the lovely wonders, inspirations, and enchantments. Maybe something served to you by your local alehouse woman, maybe. Anyway, until next Sunday or this coming Wednesday, play well. Thank you very much. Bye-bye to you all. Bye.